All right, so today I want to take a few minutes and talk to you guys about buying used drums. This is a question that I get all the time from my students, and I'm constantly helping them because obviously people want to get the best bang for their buck, and so I want to talk about what exactly it is you need to look at, what makes a good drum or a bad drum, and actually I look at drums as pretty simple. I'm going to talk about exactly what that is. All right, also, if you dig this video, please like and subscribe. And for this discussion about used drums, I'll put a link to an article that I wrote as well, so you can kind of read through it or have a little bit of a reference. Okay, so anyways, what I want to talk about is I really look at four things with drums. Like I said at the beginning of the video, drums are ridiculously simple, right? It's just simply a head, right? There's a rim, there's a shell, and there's some hardware. And there's really not much else to a drum. So with that in mind, I look at four things. The first thing I look at is I look at the brand, right? And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more depth. The second thing I look at is the hardware, and I'll talk about that as well and why it's so important to look at the hardware. And then the third thing, of course, I look at is the shell of the drum, the condition of the shell, and I'll talk about what to look for there. And then, of course, the last things are the drum heads themselves, right? And why that can be, depending on the kit, is it worth the investment or not? All right. So the first thing is brands are pretty obvious. I have a bunch of different drums I brought in here, so you can kind of see some different ones. This is a set I recently bought, so it hasn't been all fixed up yet. It's just a little or Pearl President series from the 1960s. It's got these really cool wrap and stuff on it. But I buy used drums all the time, at least if I find kind of a cool bargain or something like that. And so with the brands, mainstay brands, Ludwig, Premier, Pearl, Mapex, Tama, Slingerland, Gretsch, right? Any of those and of course I'm missing a ton of different brands. You can Google it really quick. Hey, is this a reputable drum brand? But those key brands are going to be important because you know that the quality of those drums are good. Even kind of the lower end stuff by major manufacturers, like Pearl or Ludwig or Gretsch or whatever. Those are companies that have a tradition of making great drums. And so I usually tend to tell students, hey, stick with the main brands. Even if they're kind of lower, maybe cheaper sets, at least that company knows exactly what they're doing. Now, if you're looking for something a little bit better, you can dig into exactly what it is you're looking at. All right, so now let's jump into the next thing, which I said was the hardware. All right, and so the first thing I actually look at for the hardware is this right here, and I brought this out. This is an old Premier rim, and so I just wanted to show you this because what I actually look at on a rim is a couple things. So the first thing is I want to make sure that rim is totally straight, right? I don't want it to be a warp rim because if I do have to get a warp rim, I got to replace it, right? And it's not crazy expensive, but if you did that for every drum, it adds up pretty fast. The other thing I'm going to look at on the rim is it rusty or tarnished? This one is a really old rim and is actually in really great condition, right? So that's one thing you want to look at. The next thing, of course, is the hardware itself, right? Looking at, is the hardware in good condition, right? Like this one right here is obviously missing the bottom, and I'm going to have to get another, actually I already have another rim I just haven't put on yet, right? I need to get another rim for it or put the other rim on for that. But I'm going to look at this right here, and that is the lugs, right? And make sure that these are in good shape. One of the things I usually do is I'll just kind of pull on them. I check for any tarnishes or any damage to them, and make sure that they're in good working order. I want to show you this real quick with a different drum, and this is pretty evident. So right here is an old Ludwig standard, and I'll talk about this later. But with this drum, and I have the snares, I just haven't put them back on, right? But with this drum right here, you can see that these lugs are in great condition, as are this part right here, which is the rod. Now this drum, this one's going to need a little extra love. I got this from kind of the same place, and it is a Ludwig Acrolite. And this drum, actually, the rods have kind of seized up a little bit, so I got to go through. I got to make sure they're not seized up, but they're not smooth, and so I'm gonna have to go through and kind of de-rust them, grease it, and even the rim is a little bit rusty. So this drum is a great drum, but it's going to take a little bit of love to make it back up to playable condition. All right, also on the snare drums, you definitely want to take a look, make sure the throws and stuff work, because that could throw you off a little bit. A little funny. All right, anyways. So other things to kind of jump into this. So I look at the hardware. I look at the rim, the lugs, and then the rods. Make sure they're in pretty good working order. Sometimes I'll even, a lot of time, if I'm really looking carefully, I might take the drum key and just go around the head, move it kind of up or down a little bit to see how it feels. The next thing is the shell. And the thing with the shell that's important is two things. One, physical, just a quick look. Like this drum right here, you can see that this wrap is in great condition, right? But the other thing I wanted to show is the shell in good condition or not? And right here is one that I have not redone, and it's a little bit. Obviously this wrap is in bad shape. Somebody put some stuff over it and tried to pull it off, and it's just kind of gross. But as I look at the shell, it's a nice solid shell, right? There's not really much damage, a little bit right here, I guess. But when I look at it overall, the bearing edges are fairly smooth. There is a couple dings here and there, but for the most part, this is a playable drum and will be able to be fixed up. So depending on one of the things I want to note is when you're looking at the drums, one of the things that's important is how much work are you willing to put into it for the cost, right? So if you're just a beginner, I would have something that's pretty basic, not gonna put too much love into it. More experienced people might want to, they'll be like, oh, I got this old, like this one, for example, I got this 1960s Premier President Series, or not Premier, Pearl President Series. I'm gonna do something with that and kind of fix that drum up. The other thing I want to show you, a real quick trick, if you're pulling the heads off and stuff, is related to bearing edges. One of the things that you can do to kind of check it is you can just stick it and put it on a table. This is something they do it like at the Noble and Cooley company. When they finish the process, they actually put the shell on like a flat surface, specifically a table or the ground or whatever, and they use a table, right? But then they'll shine a light in to make sure no light seeps out. You can do that and just kind of move it around, make sure it doesn't wobble. And in this drum, when I tested it the other day, it's actually very flat. So it's in pretty good shape. It's going to take a little bit of love, but that's pretty much it. All right, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about very briefly is something that is related to the drum heads. I think I hit everything up. Oh, on the shell also, sorry. Before I move on, I want to talk about the shell. So this shell is a good example. When I got this drum recently, I actually had to redo it. I had to decide if I wanted, this is a 1960s or like 1969 Ludwig Standard, right? They're a little bit less expensive drum when they came out, but they're hardwood shells, and the wrap on this was all bubbly and weird. So I took it off, I sanded it down. I put a little probably extra time into it, but it ended up being a really cool looking drum. And it's a decent drum. So it's all about how much time and effort you want to put into it. If that drum is going to have value for you, right? And the last thing I wanted to talk about actually was the drum heads. And the reason I bring up drum heads, right, is because like on this one, obviously I put on a new drum head, new top and bottom heads, right, to make sure it's going to do what I need it to do. But the reason I bring up drum heads is drum heads are a big deal, because if I buy a really cheap set, and I have to put new drum heads on it, it could be almost half the price of that set, if not as much as the set. Now, as a person who, if I'm going to put a little bit of money into the kit, then I just realize, hey, you know what, I'm going to have to go in and put new heads on the kit. And those obviously going to be like Evans or Remo or whatever company you like, Aquarian, whatever, right? So anyways, the point is that what I would do is I'm going to go through and I have to make that assessment. So sometimes if I was getting a beginner kit, eventually you just have to accept that you're going to have to eventually replace the heads. But you could I sometimes get drum head or kits that'll have beat the heck heads, but they'll actually be really nice drums. But the person, they just had it in their garage like, oh, this drum set's all beat up, when really all it needs is some switched out heads. So anyway, basically that's a quick guide to buying used drums. Remember, the main things are, you're going to look at the brand, look at the hardware, right? That includes the rims, the lugs, and the rods. You're going to look at the shell, and what I do with the shell is just really quick look it over, check the bearing edges, make sure there's no holes or any obviously major issues, and then the last thing is I'm going to look at the heads themselves, right? How much money am I willing to put into this drum set? But a lot of times buying used drums is a great way to save a few bucks and get a lot nicer product. I've got students who have bought drums, even myself have bought used drums and been able to play them for many years, and they'll last a lifetime. So that's pretty much it. Take a look at the article and see you around.